In 1816, people across the entire northern hemisphere watched snow fall in June. Crops turned black overnight. Horses starved in their stables. Families buried their children not from war or plague, but from hunger caused by something that happened 10,000 kilometers away and months before anyone even knew it had occurred. This is the story of how a single geological event rewrote history, triggered mass starvation, and on a dark, stormy night in Switzerland gave birth to one of the most enduring monsters in all of literature. Imagine waking up in the summer of 1816 somewhere in New England or Western Europe, stepping outside expecting warm air and green fields, and instead finding frost on the ground in July. Not a brief cold snap, but weeks of relentless cold and darkness. Farmers who had planted their seeds in spring watched helplessly as the growing season simply never arrived. The sky carried an eerie reddish hue at sunset. Something was profoundly wrong with the world, and almost nobody understood why. The answer was buried in the story of Mount Tambora, a massive volcano on the island of Sumbawa in what is today Indonesia. In April of 1815, Tambora erupted in what scientists now consider the most powerful volcanic eruption in recorded human history. The explosion was so enormous that people heard it over 2,000 kilometers away. The eruption killed tens of thousands of people on the island immediately, but the true killing had only just begun. Tambora ejected an estimated 150 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere. Vast clouds of sulfur dioxide and ash climbed into the stratosphere, where they spread across the entire planet over the following months. This aerosol veil reflected sunlight away from the Earth, dropping average global temperatures by somewhere between 1 and 3 degrees Celsius. That number sounds small. The consequences were catastrophic. If you have found this story as gripping as we do, consider subscribing to this channel and hitting that like button. We explore these hidden turning points in history every single week, and you absolutely do not want to miss what comes next. By the spring of 1816, the atmospheric effects of Tambora were at their peak. In the United States, the year became known simply as 1800 and froze to death. In New England, frost struck in every single month of the year. In June, a massive snowstorm buried Vermont under nearly half a meter of snow. Corn crops failed entirely across the northeastern states. Farmers who had survived for generations on the land suddenly found themselves with nothing to harvest. In Europe, the situation was equally devastating. Switzerland experienced its worst famine in recorded memory. In Ireland, crop failures triggered widespread starvation that historians believe killed tens of thousands. In France and Germany, bread prices skyrocketed beyond what ordinary families could afford. Riots broke out across European cities as desperate people stormed grain stores and attacked merchants. Governments teetered under the pressure. The social fabric of entire nations began to fray in ways that would have consequences for generations. In Asia, the monsoon patterns shifted dramatically. The disruption to rainfall in India contributed to a massive outbreak of a new and deadly strain of cholera that eventually spread across the globe, beginning one of the great pandemic waves of the 19th century. The human cost of a single volcanic eruption on a remote Indonesian island was being counted in millions of lives across every continent on Earth. And then there was a dark and stormy summer on the shores of Lake Geneva in Switzerland. A young woman named Mary Godwin, who would soon become Mary Shelley, had traveled to Switzerland with the poet Percy Bysshe Shelley and their companions, including the legendary Lord Byron. The summer of 1816 was so cold, so relentlessly gloomy and wet, that the group found themselves trapped indoors day after day. To pass the long, dark hours, Byron proposed a challenge. Each of them would write a ghost story. Mary was 18 years old. She struggled at first to find her idea. Then one night, lying awake in the darkness, a vision came to her. She imagined a pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together, a hideous phantasm of a man stretched out before him. From that sleepless, stormy night, born of volcanic winter, Frankenstein began to take shape. The darkness outside her window, the cold that seemed to have no end, the sense that nature itself had turned hostile and unknowable, all of it poured into the pages of a book that would change literature forever. The connections do not stop there. Lord Byron, equally trapped by the volcanic summer, wrote a haunting poem called Darkness, in which he imagined the sun extinguished and the world descending into frozen chaos. It reads almost like a witness account of what the world outside his window actually felt like. John Polidori, also part of that Lake Geneva group, wrote a story called The Vampire, which directly inspired Bram Stoker decades later when he created Dracula. The monsters of modern imagination were born from a volcanic winter. The year without a summer also accelerated enormous historical migrations. Tens of thousands of Americans abandoned the failing farms of New England and moved westward, dramatically accelerating the settlement of Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. The suffering of ordinary people helped fuel the rise of new religious movements seeking explanation and comfort. It contributed to the political instability that shaped European nationalism for the rest of the 19th century. What this story reveals is something profound about the fragility of human civilization. A mountain we had never seen, on an island most people could not name, speaking a language of fire and ash, reached across the entire planet and changed the course of history. It killed harvests in Massachusetts, triggered riots in Paris, launched pandemics in Bengal, and on a rainy night in Switzerland, it whispered a nightmare into the imagination of a teenage girl that the world has never forgotten. The year 1816 reminds us that we live on a restless planet, that the systems holding our civilization together are thinner than we like to believe, and that sometimes the most world-changing events begin not with armies or elections, but with a rumble in the earth that most of the world never even heard. If this story moved you the way it moves us, please subscribe to this channel, leave a comment telling us which part surprised you most, and share this video with someone who loves history. There are so many more stories like this one waiting for you here.